Hello folks, I'm Michael Bott.
And I'm Rupert Soskin. Welcome to another of the Calanais Conversations. We're the Prehistory Guys, and today we are talking with Melanie Johnson, Project Manager for Fieldwork and Head of Post-Excavation at CFA Archaeology. Melanie is also a specialist in prehistoric pottery and is involved in some fascinating new research around Calanais, so we thought we'd invite her along to tell us what she's up to. Mel, welcome, and thanks very much for joining us. Now listen, before we ask you about your work up here on Lewis, would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers? Tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to be working here.
So I did my undergraduate degree in archaeology at Edinburgh University, and during that period of time I spent an awful lot of time digging up in the Hebrides. And I continued that work into my postgraduate, and it was during my postgraduate studies that we set up this research project up near Calanais. And since graduating that second time, I've continued to work in Scottish archaeology, and I'm currently a project manager at CFA Archaeology Limited, based in Musselburgh.
So, Mel, the reason we're talking to you now is that you're the author of an online publication called the Calanais Fields Project. Sounds very intriguing indeed. Tell us, what are the Calanais Fields? How old are they? And what work did you do on them?
The University of Edinburgh used to own a piece of land behind the Calanais Stones Visitor Centre. And there was a small piece of work done to put in some an electrical cable in 1998. And as part of that work, a tiny little fragment of a stone wall was found under the peat. And at the time, I was doing my PhD looking at sites in the Hebrides, and it was kind of sort of intriguing. And we were looking for projects for students, undergraduate students, to get involved with. So myself and a colleague, Kath Flitcroft, we came up with this idea to investigate what was going on that piece of land. Obviously very straightforward because it was owned by the University of Edinburgh. And so we raised some funds, put a package of work together, stuck a load of undergraduate students in a minibus and drove up to Lewis and spent 2 summers excavating in those fields, sort of behind the visitor centre, just down from where the Calanais Standing Stones are. We did a programme of test pitting, and then we expanded that into some larger excavation areas and found buried under the peat this hidden landscape, basically. We just, again, It was small trenches, so you're just seeing little fragments of it, but it suggests that there's a much wider landscape buried under there. We found stone walls, clearance heaps, and a building, and there was a building next to an area of cobbled surface with a wall demarcating the 2 areas. And we believe from radiocarbon dating of the date of peat inception, we think that it's probably late Bronze Age or early Iron Age in origin.
Fascinating. So what do you think the fields were used for? Are they growing crops or restricting movement of animals, or what do you think they're for?
Bit of both. So as part of the work, we took samples from the peat. We sort of take blocks of peat out of the sections of the trench edges, and the pollen analysis work, the palynology that we did on those peat samples, indicates both cereal cultivation and pastoral activity. There are certain indicators, different types of weed seeds that are common in pastoral fields, and then the cereal grain itself, the pollen from the cereal grain, is there in the record, and it goes alongside a decline in tree cover, so they're clearing woodland to create space to grow crops and have animals.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So, I mean, how, if at all, do these fields relate to the main Calanais site, the stones, if at all? Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're certainly there at the same time. The standing stones will have been visible. The standing stones would have been there from the late Neolithic, and obviously there was activity going on at the stones during the Bronze Age, so they would have been visible. They would have been known about. We know that there's a small amount of agricultural activity happening up around the stones themselves. How much the day-to-day activities between the people farming and keeping animals down in the fields had an impact on the stones themselves, we can't really be sure. We don't know what ritual significance they may have had, if any. It's hard to know, but certainly the two things were coinciding together within the landscape.
Yeah, but not actively in use at the same time. What's the latest date on the pottery, which I think which is what you used to get the earlier date for the system?
From the field system, our field system.
Yeah.
We do have some indication of Neolithic activity, and that's just, I mean, we didn't really find an awful lot in the way of artifacts, a few tiny fragments of pottery, a few tiny fragments of lithics, there's some flint, there's some pitch stone, which is probably Neolithic in date, but it's hard to know whether that's just a bit of kind of background noise because you've got that wider Neolithic ritual landscape going on, but there's not really anything. There's not anything firmly datable from the period of activity from when the stones themselves were put up.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So still lots more to be found out. Well, Mel, finally, last question: do you think that there are lots more prehistoric fields under the peat in the Outer Hebrides that are just waiting to be discovered?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the significant outcomes of this project, despite the scale of it. It was only 2 seasons of excavation and small trenches. It has demonstrated that there is widespread activity across that area. It ties in with some work that Trevor Cowie did in the 70s, a bit further south from the Calanais Stones. It's impossible to see it. Obviously, it's beneath a couple of meters of peat, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It's just hard to get to.
Yeah.
It's hard to get down to that. It's hard to know where to dig when you can't see it in the first place. There's a small number of other sites through the Hebrides where fragments of stone walls of similar date have been found beneath the peat. We tend to focus on the Maca because it's easy. You get wind blow and you get things exposed. You get the later large stone monuments, your brochs, and those kind of smaller, more kind of day-to-day, mundane, domestic level sites. They're harder to see and harder to find for us as archaeologists. So yeah, I mean, we know that the Hebrides were inhabited probably from the Mesolithic. So the people have got to have been living somewhere. They've got to have been doing something somewhere. Yeah. So yeah, we know from the pollen record that this is not tiny, small scale stuff. This is, it's landscape scale. So it's got to be down there somewhere. Yeah. We just need to dig up the whole of the West Niles. Remove all the peat.
Fantastic. I mean, it really does give a different context for even looking at the stones when you become aware of the activity or the confirmation of that kind of activity going on around the stones, or with people that knew of the stones at least. Mel, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for the conversation. Fascinating stuff. And I'm sure we could talk for a long time, but for now, we will say goodbye. Thank you. Thank you for watching, folks out there. Goodbye from Rupert.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from Mel.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.